Hello, everybody. Welcome to history class. This is recording number 6 for Unit 11, lesson number 6. The first day anybody will see this will be on April 18th. Take a look at the people on the front page here and maybe pause the recording and see if you can identify who they are. Okay, so this is Fidel Castro. This is Martin Luther King. This is President Johnson. And this is President Kennedy. So good job if you knew all of them. All right, so this lesson, we're going to talk a lot about Martin Luther King again. We're going to talk about how he had won a prize called the Nobel Peace Prize. And we're going to continue to talk about what's going on in the South with the Civil Rights Movement, specifically talking about voting. And then we're going to talk a little bit about another civil rights leader, and his name is Malcolm X. And we're going to talk about the events in Selma and how that played out on television. Okay, first we're going to talk about the Nobel Peace Prize. So there's a category of prizes that are awarded to people worldwide every year, and they are called the Nobel Prizes, and they have different categories. There's like science and literature and peace and other categories. So it was all started by a guy named Alfred Nobel, who, when he died, instead of giving his fortune to his family, he decided to donate his fortune and create a series of prizes called the Nobel Prizes. And one of them we're going to talk about today is the Peace Prize. And this is awarded every year to a person who has done the most to create peace between nations or to help eliminate any kind of violence or animosity between people and nations, and for someone who is known for the promotion of peace. So for our purposes here, we're going to be talking about Martin Luther King Jr. because he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And that was in 1964. So a couple of things just to know about this. Of course, if you think back to what we've learned about Martin Luther King thus far and what you already know about Martin Luther King, you can certainly understand why he would be considered for such an award. Because remember, he was the person who believed in peaceful protesting to further a cause rather than engage in any kind of violence or rebellion. So peace is just, part of his whole philosophy. So when he won this prize in 1964, he was the youngest person at that time to have ever won it. And of course, this award came after he had given that famous I Have a Dream speech at the March on Washington. And of course, there was some controversy that surrounded him getting this award. And of course, there was people who believed that he did not deserve the honor. And in fact, he was even apprehensive about accepting this award because he did not feel that he was deserving of it because his ultimate goal had yet to be achieved at that point. So he did not feel he was at the end of the peace process or the civil rights movement. So he didn't think he should have won it at that point. But nonetheless, he does accept the award. And if you go ahead and watch the video here that I'm going to share out with you in a second, this shows him winning that award. So the link to the video should pop up here in Edpuzzle for you under one of the questions. So go ahead and once you get the link, pause the recording and watch the video. Okay, so the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we talked about that last lesson. And remember, we said it was a continuation of what President Kennedy had started, and it was signed by Lyndon Johnson. And it made segregation illegal. So no more, black versus white things anywhere. No water fountains, no bathrooms, no buses. Everything was supposed to be equal for every person. And something else it did was that it banned employment discrimination. So now when people went to apply for jobs, they could not be denied employment based on their race. But there was still one problem. An area that the Civil Rights Act did not address was voting rights. Although every citizen is granted the right to vote in the United States, in the South, people would not allow blacks to vote. And there was many ways in which they prevented people from coming to vote. So in certain towns in the South, they made it very difficult for people who they didn't want to be able to vote. What they did was they would limit the number of registration days to maybe once or twice a month when anyone could come and register to vote. And oftentimes they made them at very inconvenient times. And if you couldn't get there during that time, you couldn't register, and then you'd have to wait a whole month to do it again. And when it was an election year, that would be important because during an election year, you can only register to vote at certain times, or you are prevented from voting in the election. Other things they did was they physically blocked people from coming to voter registrations, and in many places they even created tests that people who were applying for voter registration would have to take these tests, and they were ridiculous tests that nobody would be able to pass. And if you didn't pass the test, then they wouldn't allow you to register. So obviously that was not legal. There's nothing in the United States Constitution that says you have to pass a test to be granted the right to vote. So that was illegal. And another illegal thing that was done in many towns in the South was they would tell voters that they had to pay a fee to register. And oftentimes it was a huge amount of money that people could not afford to pay. So all kinds of crazy things were happening like that just to keep these people from voting. So this led to a place in Alabama, and if you look here at the map, it's a town called Selma. It's in the state of Alabama, and this became a real hot issue in this town because Selma had a very huge African American community. It was something like, if you read in the book, it tells you, I forget the percentage, but I want to say it was something like 80% of the population was African American, but only like 3% of the population was registered to vote. And all the leaders of this town, of course, were white, even though it was very largely African American community. And it was extremely racist. And the people who led the town did not want the black people to get the right to vote. So what happens is that the leaders of the black community in Selma invite Martin Luther King and his group to come to Selma to help them to fight for their voting rights, because now Martin Luther King's pretty famous and very well known. So their thought is they can draw attention if Martin Luther King comes and maybe put a little pressure on these leaders here to loosen up the voting rules. Okay, so you're going to watch a couple of videos here, and what you're going to see is the story of the Selma to Montgomery March, and this was in 1965, where it was a peaceful demonstration where thousands of people collected in Selma and walked to Montgomery, which was not far, but another town, in protest of the denial of voting rights in that area. And it starts off as a very peaceful protest, but as you'll find out in the video, it does not stay that way. And it becomes known then as Bloody Sunday because of what happens. So the first video you're going to see is a little bit of a story about that. After you finish watching that, continue on the recording until the next video link pops up. And this one, it is just, it is a music video. And it is from a movie that was called Selma that was made a few years ago that tells the story of Selma, Alabama. And it is a song by John Legend, and it features the rapper Common. And the song actually tells the story of Selma. So go ahead and watch those. You can pause the recording in between and then grab the links. And then once you're finished, continue on with the recording. Okay, so now you've kind of seen the story. So just to recap, so the Selma to Montgomery March happens in March of 1965 when people march to Montgomery. And if you look at the map here, you can see the distance here. They start in Selma and march to Montgomery, and they're stopped on this bridge by a police blockade. And there's sort of a standoff, you know. Eventually the police start shooting tear gas, and they start, you know, pushing people back and eventually hitting them and clubbing them. And it ends up being called Bloody Sunday. And what happens is all of this is getting broadcast on television. And for one of the first times, the rest of the country can see what's going on in the South. Because remember, TV was still fairly new at this time. And so when there was a big event, you know how it is now. If there's a big event, all the news people show up, right? Well, it was no different then. All the news people showed up here, and they begin broadcasting this on TV. So we will see the outcome of that a little bit later. But as you can imagine, it helps further Martin Luther King's message once people see the violence on television. Okay, so at the same time, we have another civil rights leader come into the picture, and this is Malcolm X. And he originally did not believe in the peaceful protest like Martin Luther King does. And he led a group of people that was a more forceful and powerful group of people who often led violent protesting. They would encourage people to, you know, cause a little bit of trouble to get attention. And he eventually becomes a Muslim, and he leads a group called the Nation of Islam. And you will see a little bit about how he changes his message after, you know, this process of changing religions. Excuse me. So you're going to watch a Brain Pop video about him. Go ahead. The link should pop up here in a second. If you need the login, you can use our Agora login to watch the Brain Pop on Malcolm X. So go ahead and pause the recording and take a look at that. Okay, so we're going to stop there now that we've learned a little bit about Martin Luther King, the Nobel Prize, and Selma and Malcolm X. You should review these chapters in your book and read those, 47 to 48. Complete your study guide questions. Every lesson you should be completing the study guide questions because these are going to help you to study for your quiz. And of course you have graded assignment 1106. Make sure you have all previous graded assignments finished, because coming up next is the Unit 11 quiz. So this should be completed after this lesson, because it is going to cover everything we've learned from lessons 1 through lesson 6. So you could do this right now, or if you want to wait to take the quiz during our class time, we will have time on Friday to catch up, but nonetheless it should be completed at the end of lesson 6. Okay, if you have any questions, just drop me an email, and I will see you all tomorrow on the next recording. Have a great day.